When our children were quite small, my wife came up with the idea that I should play Santa Claus. The plan was that I would dress up and come knocking at the front door, surprising the boys with Kris Kringle's unexpected visit. Today is the fourth Sunday of Easter. The readings today invite us to consider how God calls us and whether we recognize the sound of his voice. In the first reading, we hear a portion of Luke's account of Peter speaking to the crowds at Pentecost. Peter has forcefully impressed on the listeners that they have mistakenly crucified the very Messiah that they have been seeking. Peter encourages them to seek God's forgiveness and to accept the Holy Spirit. And Peter continues that God will call many, offering them the safety and the reward of salvation. Now, my first challenge was to find a Santa outfit. I wasn't keen on the idea of buying one, so I asked some of my co-workers if anyone might have something that I could borrow. Sure enough, one man who had played Santa at a mall for some years offered to lend me his. So I tried it on. The sleeves and the pant legs were a bit short. I looked like a Santa who got caught in the rain. But I reasoned, how critical would young kids be when Santa suddenly appears at the front door? In the second reading, Peter continues to remind us that God calls us through the example of Christ. We are called to endure our individual suffering, just as Jesus suffered for us, knowing that it connects us to our true shepherd. Now, when the evening arrived for Santa to appear, my wife distracted the kids while I costumed up and left through the back door. Going around the house, I arrived at the front door, knocking loudly and giving it my best ho, ho, ho. I could hear my wife encouraging the boys to open the door to see who was there. When it swung open, I gave it another ho, ho, ho. The youngest boy began to cry. The next one let out a shriek and headed for the other end of the house. But the oldest, clinging to his mother's leg, stood his ground. He looked the Santa with the short pants and the sleeves over very carefully, and then he said one word, "Daddy?" I think he recognized my voice. In the gospel today, Jesus speaks of a situation that would be familiar to his listeners. The core of the Good Shepherd gospel is the voice of the shepherd. Jesus' listeners knew, and we know from our hearing of the passage, that the sheep in a flock become familiar, even connected to the voice of the shepherd who leads and protects them. And that brings us back to how God calls us and whether we recognize his voice. Today is designated as the World Day of Prayer for Vocations Sunday. We're called to consider our own vocation, not only today, but on a regular basis throughout our life. And what is our individual vocation? And how do we know? People often struggle with the idea of vocation or God's calling, and Jesus doesn't usually show up at the door with a message for us. Maybe we should each begin with a simple question to ourselves: what really makes us happy? After we sift through all the temporal things like ice cream, fashion, power, pleasure, esteem, then we can focus on the things that serve God and others. Don't know what really makes you happy? Maybe we should take some time to pray with Jesus, seeking the internal nudge, that voice that says, "This is what I'm calling you for. This is why I created you. This is where you will find your happiness in life." And as we continue to pray, we also begin to notice what we are drawn toward. Is it married life? Being a father or a mother? Is it being the best doctor, nurse, lawyer, accountant that we can be? Is it being a priest or a sister or a nun or even a deacon? What is it that we encounter and then leave and then come back to over and over again? If we consider the idea of dressing up like Santa to surprise some children, we can ask ourselves, would we recognize Jesus' voice even if he approaches us in a form that we don't expect? We hear in the first reading, God invites us through the Holy Spirit to be who we are created to be and to be happy in our vocation. In the second reading, we understand that Jesus will support us and guide us through the difficulties that may arise as we pursue our vocation. We come to understand in the gospel that through persistence in prayer, observation, and participating in community, we learn to hear the voice of our shepherd, calling us to follow him on the path that he has set for each one of us. This Sunday is designated as the World Day of Prayer for Vocations. We each have our own individual, special, and unique vocation. And discovering that vocation, living that vocation, will lead us to serve God and others joyfully. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is calling us.